I'm back working on the sled today. I got some new parts. You can see them over there on the bench. I'll show you in a second exactly what I got.
So I ordered the MCB kit with a crank and 2 pistons. It comes with ISOFlex grease. I'm not sure if that's a mistake. I got 2 tubes of it. It also comes with the whole gasket kit. You can see it actually is RS specific, which is kind of cool. And here's a few other things I picked up outside of that kit. So I got OE gaskets. I got some Honda Bond, and that ISOFlex grease came with the sled.
So when debating what gaskets to use, should I use the OE gaskets that I bought from the dealer, or should I use the aftermarket gaskets? I typically use OE gaskets on all my stuff, on Subarus, other dirt bikes I've built, every engine, right? Just because OE gaskets are good quality, you know, they're probably going to seal a little bit better, hopefully, right? Generally it seems to be a consensus online. I'm going to make that decision as I'm building it, and obviously I'll let you guys know. And also there's multiple gasket thicknesses that comes with both kits, right? Both kits come with 3 base gaskets for the cylinders. So those base gaskets are different thicknesses, and it changes your compression ratio. The RS is obviously a high compression motor, right? And that's due to like the heads and stuff. I'm not sure if I would imagine the RS base gasket is different than a 600 HO base gasket, but I think I might run the thick gasket on the bottom, just because I'm running pump gas. Obviously, our pump gas is notoriously, not that good. We've only got 91 max, and that 91 might be 91, might be 89, right? I'm gonna start cleaning now, and next time we speak, I'm gonna be assembling. Okay, so I thought I'd do a little bit of a voiceover for this video here. Something new I'm trying. Let me know in the comments and what you think about this whole setup. So here, I'm just doing some sanding. I decided to switch back to a razor blade. You can see for a second there. You gotta be very light with that stuff, scraping on these aluminum surfaces. Just some more sandpaper at 600 grit. Blow it out. Try and get all the little filings. You can see them coming out there with the brake clean. Just get as clean as you can. And then I go straight into putting some gaskets on. Here's a water pump. I didn't need to take this cover off, so I put some gasket maker on it because it's probably not gonna come off again. Here we got the water pump, same deal. Didn't need to come off, but we'll seal it up good so it doesn't leak for the rest of the life of the motor, hopefully. Here I got my buddy to help me put the crank in. It's kind of good to have a buddy to help you with this because there's lots of little there's some, obviously you can see the seals, and there's little rings kind of got to slap down to some grooves, so it's nice to have someone hold it and drop it in while you're lining everything up. That was a big help. Here I am filling up the water pump cavity because the water pump gets filled up with oil. There's a little drip bottle in the sled, but it's nice to pre-fill it. And then here I am just spreading some gasket maker around. It's just a thin little layer. You don't want this stuff squirting out into the crankcase. And there's 2 little passages, you can see them. I guess coolant flows through those, through the water pump. So there's a little groove, so I filled the groove with the gasket maker. These case bolts, I'll just kind of run them down, sucking the case down as I've seen. Because there's some gaps, so I just kind of did it a little bit randomly, but I'm not sure how big of a deal that is. There's a torquing procedure, which I did after once I torqued it. These bolts here are actually through holes into the crankcase. I'm not sure why they did that, but they go straight through and they're open to the crankcase. So I definitely would make sure to put Loctite on these. If you're not going to do it on other ones, I'd put some on these bolts here, just so there's a little bit of seal to it. You know what I mean? These bolts here, you might not even need the Loctite, but I already had the Loctite on the go, so I just put a little bit on these. These next ones coming up here, definitely we don't need to Loctite them, but I'm not sure why at the time. I guess I thought it was a good idea. I probably wouldn't now that I'm thinking about it.
So of course we got the PTO side, the bearings in there that needs Isoflex grease. So I greased that and I kind of made sure I got lots in there. The manual calls for when you assemble it to put some between the bearing and the seal. I actually forgot to do that. So I made sure I squished a lot in behind, and a lot went in, so I'm very confident that that bearing is totally greased, but I'm probably going to have to grease that bearing again before it would necessarily need it, you know what I mean? So I'm probably going to grease it again soon, just to make sure that there's lots of grease in there.
So this ray valve was actually leaking before I purchased the sled. So I never took the gasket off and replaced the gasket. I just kind of cleaned it up and put it back together because the bolts had actually came loose, which is the reason why I was leaking. So that's actually been fine since I had the sled back together. Some more cleaning here, nothing too fancy to mention. Just cleaning the surfaces, gotta be perfect. Here I was doing kind of a light hone slash, well, not a hone, but it's a glaze, right? Just with some sandpaper. That's probably 220 grit, I think. Looks like it. Because you can be a little bit aggressive. The nickel steel is pretty hard, and your fingers don't put a whole lot of pressure. So I was kind of trying to do a little bit of a crosshatch. Looked alright to my eyes. You know, definitely deglaze it, which is all you really need.
I just checked the ring end gap, and it's about 9 thousandths on both rings here. The manual, the sheet they gave me, says the range is 14 thousandths to 38 thousandths. This sled being naturally aspirated, no race gas, I'm gonna run pump gas. I'm gonna run closer to the 14 thousandths end. Boosted motors, nitrous on car motors and stuff, you gotta run a bigger gap. But for these, I'm gonna gap them a little bit tighter, you know, closer to that spec, to the lower the spec. So I'm going to do it now. I'm going to give it a quick little grind. I'm going to do it dirty with a file because I don't have the proper grinding tool for the rings. So we're going to try our best to make them square and even, and we'll keep measuring them up. There's a million videos on YouTube how to do this. I've already got a ring in the bore here. You just put the ring in, put the piston down, square it up because it's got to be square. Obviously you can't have it crooked, it'll throw off your measurement. Stick your feel gauge down, and then we feel a light drag on it. You feel just grazing the piece of metal here, then you know that's where your measurement's to. So you just keep checking, take it out, grind it, put it back in, test it until you get whatever spec you want. So now we got our rings gapped. I got my piston here. You can see there's a couple little pins in the grooves, so obviously the gap got to end on that little pin. It's like that in two-stroke motors and probably some other motors also. There's pins because if these rings spin and get into the wrong place, it'll catch one of those ports. You can see how, like, you know, there's 10 ports in the engine probably. The ring will snag on that if it doesn't stay in the exact spot. And the rings also have, it's too small for you to see, but there's little stamped markings right next to the gap. That faces up. It faces to the top of the motor. You can also tell that there's a taper to the rings. The top of them actually, if you were to look at the rings, almost like a plate, it kind of got a bit of a taper on the outside, and the bottoms of the ring are totally flat, so they face up that way. If you can't see the mark, taper faces up, and you just kind of spin them on. It's one cylinder done. I'm going to gap the rings for the other side now. Make sure that's all good, and then we'll get to assembling. We're getting close.
Okay, here we are, just cleaning up the rods, making sure there's no lint before I put these little roller bearings in. Obviously everything here gets lubed first before it gets assembled, just because nothing wants to run dry when you first start the motor. Put the wrist pins in, put one pin clip in the piston, push the pin through, and then you'll see in a second I put the other clip in. These are a bit finicky, you know, you want to make sure they don't run across the shop. Sometimes you can lock them with your fingers, but I just give them a little extra nudge with the pliers there. Pop them in, make sure they're in the groove. They cannot come out because they'll destroy your motor. Putting the cylinders in can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're doing this in the sled. You kind of got to squish the rings together with your fingers. You can, obviously, not like the car, you can't put the piston into a nice little holder and compress the rings and slide it in, so you got to do it that way. And obviously, when you put these cylinders on, there's lots of ports, and like we mentioned before, those rings have gaps. You don't want to spin the cylinders when you're putting them on. You don't want those gaps to line up in the wrong place. Something you'll see me doing here, I'm putting some oil in the cylinders. So these cylinders don't have dowels, they just sit on freely. And I read online, I believe, or maybe actually in the instructions, but you gotta spin the motor over with the cylinders loose, so the bolts are not snug at all, they're just like not even finger tight. Then you spin the motor over to kind of center the cylinders, and then you give them a little snug with your fingers and then you torque them. I'm not sure if that's the proper way to do it, but I can remember when I was researching about doing this build, that's what I came up with, so that's what I'm doing here.
I've got my head gaskets here, and I've decided so far to use. I'm using these aftermarket gaskets that came with the kit. I believe I read in the manual, maybe it was online. You want to put the head down straight and not slide it. Obviously that makes sense anyways, because you don't want to put it down and roll these little O-rings out. You know, they're only just barely held in there.
Here we are with the head bolts. Snug them all by hand. You can see me do a bunch of steps in this part here because obviously the head's got to be torqued very well, you know, very properly. You don't want anything to be warped here or squished with those little gaskets. So running everything down in a couple steps. I'm using the gun here, but I'm just using the gun just to run them down. They're not even snug at that point. Then you give them a few little turns in increments with your torque wrench up to the proper torque. There is a torquing procedure which I followed here. You can find that online anywhere. Pretty simple though. It goes inside out. You know, you could probably figure it out if you've torqued a lot of things in your life.
This video has gotten a little bit long, so I think I'm going to cut it there, and I'm going to do another video just to keep these short so that you're not watching a half an hour long video of this stuff. It gets a little bit tedious. Next one we'll be putting in the sled. As always, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying this stuff. I've seen a couple guys commenting saying they watch it because they're doing a similar thing on their sled, which is pretty fun. So I'll see you guys next time.